For those of you who have been living under a rock for the past year, a very controversial game was taken to the back of the barn and put out of its misery for good. That game, of course, is BioWare's Anthem, published by EA, and I wanted to talk about this because the latter would seemingly love for this to disappear and let bygones be bygones. Now let's lay the groundwork for this. Back in July last year, BioWare announced, after careful consideration, we will be sunsetting Anthem on January 12, 2026, giving players just 5 months and change to play the game one last time before it becomes unplayable forever. Now, this comes in the wake of initiatives like Stop Killing Games, which seeks to address the ongoing issue of games being rendered unplayable once devs pull the plug on them. This is never a good thing, of course, as it brings into question the idea of ownership, transparency, ethics, and even outright refunds, seeing that a product gamers paid for is being taken away from them. But for as much flack as BioWare and EA for that matter have garnered over time, including over this recent decision, I must say that in this instance, I actually agree with BioWare, and I'll explain why. Now, back in April of 2019, just a couple months after Anthem's launch, an article written by Jason Schreier, formerly of Kotaku, was published, which essentially pulled the curtain back on the game's chaotic development, ultimately revealing that BioWare was caught with their pants down. A wave of unsettling statements was leveled against BioWare's overall handling of the development process, coming from none other than their staff. Everything from developer crunch, mental breakdowns, time wasting, miscommunication or lack thereof, no clear vision, right down to resignations. Everything and the kitchen sink was just laid bare for all to see. And while BioWare would try their best to hush the backlash that the hour-plus long article generated by responding with a piece that was completely tone deaf, citing crunch time in air quotes and promising that Anthem would be everything it can be, Schreier's article all but confirmed what many who played the game had already suspected. Now, I am not going to dissect the article. After all, it is a one-hour read, so you can do that yourselves with the link provided in the description. But instead, I wanted to discuss my thoughts as to why Anthem needs to be discontinued. So let's get into it. If as a studio you are indecisive about your game, then the mass gaming public will decide for you. If during development a clear path toward what you want to make is not established, then the players will write that narrative themselves. And that is the last thing that you want, especially if you plan on jumping on the live service model, because if you have no long-term plans, it would completely defeat the purpose. And it did not take players very long, by the way, before they realized that something was off, almost like the game was unfinished. After all the footage that was shown to pique player interest, Anthem failed to deliver on what was promised in those trailers, even if they weren't quite sure what the game would be. Listen, gamers do not care, and neither are they supposed to have any sympathy when they are spending their hard-earned money to buy your product. It is your responsibility as a developer to rise to the occasion and meet player expectations, because you created those expectations in the first place. EA and BioWare clearly did not learn from their past mistakes, nor did they learn from their competitors. Games like Destiny, Warframe, heck, even Fortnite were the perfect case studies into how they could have approached live service and also what pitfalls to avoid. Now, maybe it's just me, but Anthem should have been a free-to-play game, since they have gone on record saying that it will have microtransactions, focusing on customizing your exosuit. This would have made them a boatload of money while boosting player retention if they were to do it right. Now think about it. You hear about this game, it's got some buzz around it, it's free to play, you try it, it feels good, it looks good, hopefully plays good, and then the game prompts you, hey, don't you want to pilot this badass new mech or use this super cool lightsaber chainsaw gun for just $3? They could even have done collaborations with Gundam or the Armored Core series for limited time events to just keep driving players to spend money on cool shit. Whichever way you swing it, BioWare dropped the ball on this one. On another note, EA's outright unchecked disdain for single-player games, thereby forcing Anthem itself to be a live service product, even when they had not mastered the art and craft of that genre, and also how risky of a model live service was to endorse in the first place, was a gross oversight. Look, as a seasoned developer, there was no excuse for BioWare to release Anthem in the state that it was in, with mega hits like Mass Effect and Dragon Age under their belt, Fans had every reason to be excited, or at the very least a little curious, but with bugs, constant crashes, error messages, and a ton of server disconnects, even bricked consoles, Anthem would end up being more of a chore to play rather than a fun event-filled ride. You know, the sad part is that 6 years later, all these things still plague the game, and while there have been some efforts to make things better, the core issues of the game are still unresolved. It's almost as if BioWare did zero player testing prior to the release of the game, because no doubt it would have been much better had they taken the feedback positively. Now, we've all heard it before, but communication is key in everything, so that had BioWare or EA for that matter been as transparent as possible, fans would perhaps have had a different reaction. The issue here is that at no point were any attempts made to smooth things over, especially when disaster was staring at them right in the face. Delay the game, finesse the narrative, do anything to stop the bleeding, because saying something is much better than not saying anything at all. And yes, the game was bad, with repetitive, uninspired missions, no actual side quests, no impetus to explore the open world, no variety in combat where you get to truly feel like you are in a badass, powerful exosuit because all you do is shoot most of the time. A lack of robust customization for your suit or your character. There isn't even a stat screen, by the way. And no meaningful rewards or loot to make you feel like you are really progressing, or to keep you playing because you're compelled and intrigued by what you could possibly earn next. A blasé, confusing cookie cutter story where you have to stop the big brooding bad guy because he took up the ancient powerful artifact that was poorly guarded and therefore ripe for the taking. Bland, ugly, and even downright comical looking characters that more often than not come off as annoying and obnoxious rather than well written, memorable, and cool. Owen and Haluk being the biggest culprits here. Heck, even the javelins themselves have far more personality and are much better designed than the cast, and that's when you know you've missed the mark completely. Not to mention the lack of tutorials or any in-game info to explain how mechanics work. I'm looking at you, combo system. And for crying out loud, the game wasn't even supposed to be called Anthem in the first place. Anthem is by far one of the most beautiful games that you just don't want to play for very long. It gasses you up and then blows its load embarrassingly early. I think what's interesting here is that numbers don't lie. So the reality is, for all those who were saying, well, the game isn't that bad and get all defensive, then why weren't people playing the game? Why weren't you playing the game? Why was no support coming from BioWare, thinking that players weren't going to notice that they pretty much repurpose and reuse assets already in the game as future content? Between the game failing to meet expectations by the investors' metrics, it didn't sell anywhere near projected targets, by the way. A massive drop-off of the player base to go and play other better games that were performing fantastic during that time. And of course, the insane amount of time they had to develop and ultimately pull this game together. We're talking 7 years here. It's undeniable that the overall numbers cannot be ignored. And let's not forget that over the course of 7 years, the gaming industry was bound to change. So for BioWare and EA to not have the awareness of changing trends and player expectations merely invited Anthem to walk straight into its grave, as it was definitely doomed from the start. For Anthem to turn out like this is a clear indication as to how EA and or BioWare have hardly learned anything at all. Sure, everybody loves a good return to form story, redemption arc, if you will. I mean, just look at No Man's Sky, for example. But while gamers are quick to celebrate the industry's wins, they are also equally as fast in pointing out developers that should know better and should be doing better, especially ones backed by a relatively solid track record like BioWare's. Now, perhaps the strongest reason behind why Anthem deserves to die is actually because it needs to. It needs to, because this would represent a false equivalency were it to succeed. Now think about it. A volatile train wreck of a development process sprinkled with undercooked gameplay, half-baked ideas, and overall laughably sad execution that still somehow manages to be a critical and commercial success. That would be a disaster for BioWare staff for future projects, and also set a dangerous precedence for gaming as a whole as to what would be considered acceptable standards in gaming. Like it or not, you only get one chance to make a first impression, and Anthem is the perfect example of that. And the irony of it all is that you can't have any measure of plans to support a game through a live service model if there's no real game to start with. If you don't come out of the gate swinging, gamers will eat you up and spit you out in a heartbeat and move on to the next experience that offers them more. Developers everywhere need to understand that gamers under no circumstances have to give you a second chance, and it will serve BioWare well to simply try to get it right the first time around. Hopefully this mess will be the shake up both EA and especially BioWare need to move forward and come back stronger than ever before, having learned the necessary lessons to inform any future projects down the pipeline that they put their hands to. Look, there is no question that by the time Anthem came out, it was already far too late for the game, and any hope of salvaging the situation looked increasingly bleak. By all accounts, Anthem should not have failed because it had so much potential. Let me be clear about that. But it was mismanaged and underdeveloped for years, only to be rushed out of the gate at the last second. And while opinions on what exactly happened may be mixed, one thing remains true. Anthem is done for. And that speaks to one thing and one thing only. It just did not perform well, because if it did, it would still be around like its live service counterparts that it had hoped to compete with from 6 years ago. Look, I do hope that BioWare can recapture that BioWare magic again, but unless they take a step back and regroup, the same things will happen again. Only time will tell, I guess. Anyways, drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you have any Anthem horror stories? Do gamers who bought Anthem deserve refunds, or do you think Anthem should have an offline mode to remain playable forever? Share your thoughts. And if you appreciate the video, give it a like, and of course, a sub and a share go a long way towards supporting the channel. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.